I was covered in grease lying under an old truck in my leaking garage when a billionaire CEO looked at my sick daughter and jokingly said,
Fix my late father's Bugatti, and I'll marry you.
her friends laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. What she didn't know was that those words would change both our lives forever. The ending of this story changed everything. Before we get there, take a quick second to join the community by hitting subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. I was lying on my back under the belly of an old pickup truck, the familiar smell of oil and warm grease thick in the air, when I heard the sharp, confident click of expensive heels crossing my cracked concrete floor. The sound felt completely out of place in my small, leaky garage, like someone had wandered into the wrong life by mistake. I wiped my hands on a rag and slid out on the creeper, squinting against the afternoon light coming through the open bay door. There she stood, Victoria Langford, tall, perfectly put together, wearing clothes that probably cost more than my entire month's rent. She looked around my shop with the kind of expression people save for something stuck to the bottom of their shoe. Behind her, a group of well-dressed friends lingered near the entrance, talking quietly among themselves. In the corner of the office, my daughter Lily sat at the old metal desk, her little legs swinging as she drew cars with her crayons the way she did almost every afternoon. She had been having a rough day with her breathing, but she was trying to stay strong like she always did. Victoria turned her gaze on me, that cold, perfect smile spreading across her face, then, loud enough for everyone to hear, she said it. Fix my late father's Cadillac and I'll marry you. Her friends burst into loud laughter, the sound echoing off the metal walls of my garage. One of them actually clapped like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all week. I stood there, still holding the dirty rag, grease streaked across my arms and shirt, feeling every bit of their amusement land on me like a weight. Lily looked up from her drawing. Those big, quiet eyes of hers met mine, and in that moment I felt a deep sting I hadn't felt in years, the sharp, burning kind of humiliation that settles heavy in your chest. My little girl had just watched her father be turned into a joke. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? I simply nodded, forcing a small smile, and went back to work. But that single moment planted something heavy inside me. A quiet seed of humiliation, mixed with a desperation I could no longer ignore. Because every time Lily struggled to catch her breath, I remembered how little time we had left before her surgery. And every time I looked at that vintage Cadillac sitting in my bay, I heard Victoria's laugh ringing in my ears. I didn't know it then, but that cruel joke was about to change both of our lives in ways none of us could have imagined. That night, after I finally closed up the shop, I sat beside Lily's small bed in the dim glow of her nightlight, holding her little hand while she struggled to breathe again. The sound of her labored breathing filled the quiet room, each inhale carrying a faint whistle that always made my stomach tighten. I gently rubbed her back the way the doctors had shown me, whispering soft words I hoped would comfort her, even though I knew they couldn't fix what was really wrong. She looked so small under the blanket, her face pale and tired. The doctors had been very clear with me last visit. The surgery couldn't wait much longer. Every delay made the risk greater. I sat there in the dark, listening to her breathe, feeling completely powerless in a way no father should ever have to feel. My mind kept drifting back to the mountain of medical bills already stacked on the kitchen table. Some of them I had hidden from Lily so she wouldn't worry. I thought about how little I had left after rent, groceries, and the medicine that never seemed to last long enough. And then, uninvited, Victoria's mocking laughter from earlier that day came echoing back into my head. The way she had said it so casually, like my dignity was something to be laughed at in front of my own child. Grace had stopped by the shop late in the afternoon and warned me straight out, "Eli, don't get mixed up with that woman. She's cold all the way through. People like her don't see men like us as people." I knew she was right. I knew it in my bones. But a desperate father doesn't have the luxury of pride. Not when his little girl's heart is getting weaker with every passing week. I stayed with Lily until her breathing finally evened out, and she fell into an exhausted sleep. I sat there for a long time afterward, just watching her chest rise and fall, thinking about the vintage Cadillac still sitting in my garage. I thought about Victoria's cold smile and the joke that wasn't really a joke to her. The next morning, as the first light of dawn crept through the dusty windows of the shop, I made my decision. I walked over to that Cadillac, ran my hand along its smooth fender, and told myself I would fix it, even if it meant swallowing every last bit of my dignity, even if it meant playing along with a rich woman's cruel game. Because somewhere deep down, I knew this car might be the only chance I had left to save my daughter. As I lifted the heavy hood of the vintage Cadillac, the familiar scent of old leather, metal, and aged oil rose up to meet me. There was something almost sacred about it. I could almost feel how much love Victoria's late father had poured into this car over the years, the careful way certain parts had been maintained, the small personal touches that no factory technician would ever notice. It wasn't just a machine. It was a piece of someone's heart. 3 luxury workshops had already tried and failed to bring it back to life, despite charging thousands of dollars for diagnostics and parts that never solved the problem. They had all given up, calling it a mystery. But standing there in my small, dusty garage, I felt a quiet confidence I couldn't quite explain. Later that afternoon, Victoria came by the shop again, this time with a couple of her friends trailing behind her. She walked straight over to where I was working, looked at the car, and with that same cold, amused smile, repeated her joke. "Still planning on marrying me if you fix it?" she said loudly enough for Lily to hear from the office. Her friends laughed again, the sound sharp and cutting in the quiet garage. Lily looked up from her drawing, her small face uncertain. I stayed quiet, kept my hands busy on the engine, but the humiliation burned slow and steady inside my chest like a low flame that refused to go out. The more hours I spent with that Cadillac, the more personal it started to feel. Every bolt I loosened, every wire I traced, brought me closer to understanding the man who had once owned it. It was strange how a car could carry memories that way. Late that night, after I had closed the shop and put Lily to bed, I sat alone in the dim light of the garage with a cup of coffee gone cold. My mind drifted to my own late wife, to the way she used to smile when I came home covered in grease, teasing me about the permanent black lines under my fingernails. The house was too quiet without her. Some nights the silence felt heavier than anything else. I leaned against the fender of the Cadillac and made myself a quiet promise. I was going to succeed where everyone else had given up, not for Victoria, not for her money or her cruel jokes, but for Lily, for the chance to give my daughter one less thing to worry about in this world, even if it meant swallowing every bit of pride I had left. After several long days of slow, patient work, I finally found the real problem. It was such a small, almost ridiculous thing that I stood there for a long moment just staring at it. A tiny, almost invisible wiring fault tucked deep behind the intake manifold, the kind of thing most mechanics would never bother to trace that far back. The garage was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic outside and the occasional drip of water from the leaking roof. Grease covered my hands and arms, sweat ran down my back in the humid Texas heat. And yet in that moment I felt a strange sense of clarity. 3 luxury workshops with all their fancy diagnostic machines and highly paid technicians had completely missed something this simple. I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand, took a slow breath, and drove down to the local parts store as the afternoon sun beat down on the hood of my old truck. I picked up a small replacement wire and connector, paid just $6 at the counter, and drove back to the shop. Back in the garage, I worked methodically, taking my time to clean every connection, making sure everything was secure and done right. There was something peaceful about the work that afternoon. The smell of fresh grease, the familiar feel of tools in my hands, the quiet focus. It all helped calm the storm that had been building inside me since Victoria's joke. When I finally slid into the driver's seat, wiped my hands one last time on an old rag, and turned the key, the Cadillac roared to life with a deep, rich, throaty sound that filled the entire garage. The engine settled into a strong, smooth, steady idle that sounded exactly like it must have when her father used to drive it. For the first time in months, that car was truly alive again. I sat there for a while, listening to the engine note, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction wash over me. It wasn't just a repair. It felt like I had given something back that had been lost. A few minutes later, I heard the familiar sound of Victoria's car pulling up outside. When she stepped into the garage and heard the Cadillac running smoothly, she stopped dead in her tracks. The look on her face was pure, genuine shock. She stared at the running car for a long moment, then slowly turned her gaze to me. For the first time since she had walked into my shop, she looked at me without that cold, mocking smile. There was something else in her eyes: confusion, surprise, maybe even a flicker of respect. I wiped my hands on an old rag and stood there quietly, letting her take it in. In that moment, I felt a quiet victory. Not loud or boastful, just a deep, personal sense that I had done something meaningful. But instead of thanking me, Victoria tried to brush it off with a small, forced laugh. "Well, I guess you got lucky this time," she said, though her voice didn't carry the same sharp confidence as before. I didn't argue with her. I simply nodded and went back to cleaning my tools. Inside, though, I felt something deeper than just fixing a car. For the first time, the wall she had built around herself had shown a real crack. I had no idea then that this small victory was only the beginning of something much larger, something that would pull both of us into waters we were not prepared for. A few days after the Cadillac purred to life in my garage, Victoria returned. She stepped out of her car carrying an envelope, her heels clicking with that same confident rhythm I had come to recognize. She looked around the shop, her eyes lingering on the tools and the faint oil stains on the floor, before walking over to where I was finishing up with another customer's truck. Without much greeting, she handed me the envelope and said, almost casually, that it was a large bonus for getting the job done when no one else could. She expected me to be grateful, the way everyone else in her world always was when she threw money at a problem. I took the envelope, felt the thickness of it in my hand, and then quietly handed it back to her. "Thank you," I said, "but I don't want it." Victoria blinked, clearly surprised. She wasn't used to people refusing her generosity, especially not someone like me. I could see the confusion flash across her face as she tried to understand why a struggling mechanic would turn down extra money. I looked her straight in the eye, the same eyes that had laughed at me in front of my daughter, and spoke calmly. "I remember what you said that first day, how you joked about marrying me if I fixed the car. You said it right in front of Lily." The words hung in the air between us. Victoria laughed again, a short, sharp sound, as if she still thought I was playing along with the joke, still believed I might actually be serious about the marriage part. I shook my head slowly. "I would never marry a woman who mocked me in front of my child," I said, my voice steady but firm. "No amount of money changes that." The garage fell quiet. For the first time since she had walked into my life, someone had spoken to her so directly, without fear or flattery. I could see it hit her. Her usual sharp confidence faltered. She stood there for a long moment, the envelope still in her hand, looking at me like she was seeing me for the very first time. Victoria didn't say anything else. She simply turned and walked out of the shop, her shoulders a little less straight than when she had arrived. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. I had drawn a line I wasn't willing to cross, but I had no idea what that decision would set in motion. Something told me this was far from over. In the days that followed, Victoria started coming to the shop more often. At first, she made weak excuses, a strange noise she thought she heard, a dashboard light that may or may not have flickered, questions about regular maintenance. I knew they were just reasons. Something had shifted in her after that day I refused her bonus and told her the truth about how her joke had hurt me and Lily. She would linger longer than necessary, watching me work, sometimes asking small questions about the cars or about life in a small garage like mine. I could feel her eyes on me as I balanced the long hours under hoods with taking care of Lily. She saw me answering the phone while heating up soup for my daughter's lunch, wiping grease from my hands before checking Lily's breathing, carrying her school bag when she was too tired to walk far. She saw the quiet rhythm of our days, the way I would drop everything the moment Lily needed me, the way I kept working late into the evening just to keep the bills paid. It was a life very different from the one she knew, and I could tell it unsettled her. One warm evening, as the sun was setting and painting the garage in soft orange light, Lily had a bad breathing attack. I was in the middle of changing oil when I heard her small, struggling gasps from the office. I dropped everything, rushed over and knelt beside her, rubbing her back and speaking softly, trying to help her calm down. The fear in those moments never got easier. Victoria was still there that evening. She stood frozen near the doorway, watching everything. The way I held Lily. The way my hands trembled slightly as I helped her through it. The quiet desperation I tried so hard to hide from the world. For the first time, she saw the real weight I was carrying. Not just a mechanic trying to fix cars, but a father fighting every single day for his daughter's life. When Lily finally settled and fell into an exhausted sleep in my arms, Victoria stood there for a long time without speaking. The usual sharpness in her face had softened. Later, when the garage was quiet and the only sound was the distant hum of traffic, she spoke quietly. She offered to help with the medical bills. Not as a joke, not as a power move, but in a small, almost hesitant voice. I looked at her for a long moment, the smell of oil and metal still heavy in the air, and shook my head. "I don't want your pity," I said gently but firmly. "We'll find our own way." My refusal seemed to hit her harder than I expected. She didn't argue. She simply nodded, her eyes distant, and left the shop without another word. As I watched her drive away, I felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. Something in her had shifted that evening. The crack in her armor was growing wider, and I wasn't sure what would come out of it. A few weeks later, something shifted in a way I never saw coming. Victoria had started spending more time at the shop than I ever expected. At first, she came with weak excuses, a strange sound she thought she heard in the engine, questions about regular maintenance or just passing by the area. But I could tell they were just reasons. Something had changed in her after the day I refused her bonus and spoke honestly about how her joke had hurt both me and Lily. She would linger longer, sometimes sitting quietly in the old metal chair near the office while I worked, watching everything with a different kind of look in her eyes. One warm afternoon, she arrived earlier than usual, holding a small, worn folder in her hands. Her usual confident stride was slower, more thoughtful. She told me she had been going through some of her late father's old personal records and belongings from the estate, trying to understand the man she had lost. As she spoke, she opened the folder and showed me several yellowed papers and handwritten notes. My heart nearly stopped when I saw them. There were old service records from my shop dated many years ago with her father's neat, careful handwriting in the margins. He had written simple but sincere notes praising my honesty and skill, saying I was the only mechanic he truly trusted because I listened to the cars instead of just throwing expensive parts at them. One note even mentioned how I had stayed late one rainy night to chase down a small rattle that no one else could hear, refusing to charge him extra for the time. Victoria watched my face closely as I read the old words. The discovery had hit her emotionally hard. She had always seen her father as this larger-than-life figure who only dealt with the best, the most expensive, the most prestigious. Finding out that he had quietly chosen my small, unassuming garage for years, that he had trusted me and spoken so kindly about my work, seemed to shake something loose deep inside her. Her voice was softer, almost vulnerable when she finally spoke. She asked me why I had never mentioned it, why I had never used her father's name to try and gain favor, or money, or even just a little respect. I looked at her for a long moment, the familiar smell of oil and warm metal hanging in the air around us, the late afternoon light coming through the dusty windows. I told her the truth, quietly and honestly. I said I respected her father's memory too much to use it as leverage. He had been a good man who treated me with dignity when many others didn't, and I wasn't going to cheapen that by throwing his name around now that he was gone. My words seemed to land heavily on her. For several long seconds she just stood there, staring at the old papers in her hands, her fingers tracing the faded ink. Then, without any warning, Victoria broke down crying in front of me for the first time. Not the careful, controlled tears of a woman worried about her image. These were raw, deep sobs that came from somewhere she had kept locked away for many years. She covered her face with one hand, her shoulders shaking as the weight of everything she had been carrying finally broke through. The strong, cold CEO who had once laughed at me in my own garage was suddenly just a daughter who had lost her father and was only now beginning to understand parts of him she had never known. I stood there quietly, not knowing what to say, feeling the full weight of the moment between us. The garage felt smaller, more intimate in that silence. In that quiet space, with the late afternoon light fading and the distant sound of traffic outside, I watched the cold wall she had built around herself begin to crack. The arrogant woman who had walked into my life with such disdain was slowly revealing the vulnerable, hurting person underneath. I didn't know where this path would lead us, but something told me we had crossed a line we couldn't uncross, and for the first time, I wondered if I was ready for what might come next. In the weeks that followed, Victoria started showing up at the shop without her usual armor of arrogance. The sharp edges that had once defined her seemed to soften a little each time she visited. She no longer arrived with a group of friends or that cold, dismissive look in her eyes. Instead, she came alone, often in simpler clothes, and her voice had lost some of its cutting tone. She would find small reasons to stay longer, asking about a strange sound in her car, or pretending to be interested in how certain repairs were done. I could tell these were just excuses, but I didn't call her out on them. What surprised me most was how she began speaking gently to Lily for the first time. At first, Lily was shy around her, staying close to me or hiding behind the office desk. But Victoria was patient. She would sit on the old metal chair near the corner and ask Lily about her drawings, complimenting the cars she had colored. I watched from a distance as my daughter slowly started opening up, showing her favorite sketches and even explaining why certain cars were her favorites. Seeing Victoria speak so softly to my little girl stirred something complicated inside me, a mix of warmth and careful suspicion. I could see the internal battle she was fighting with herself. There were moments when her old arrogance would try to rise up, when she would catch herself and pull back, as if she was struggling to let go of the person she had been for so many years. She would stand quietly sometimes, watching me work while lost in her own thoughts, her face showing a vulnerability I had never seen before. It was like she was slowly peeling away layers she had spent a lifetime building. One quiet evening, as the sun was setting and painting the garage in soft golden light, Victoria asked me about my late wife. Her voice was gentle, almost hesitant. She wanted to know how I was raising Lily alone, how I managed the long days in the shop while still being there for my daughter every night. For the first time, she actually listened without judging. She didn't interrupt or offer quick solutions. She just sat there, really listening as I told her about the hard days, the lonely nights, and the way Lily had become my reason for everything. The conversation felt real in a way nothing between us had before. Even so, I remained cautious, protecting my daughter's heart above all else. I had seen too much pain in my life to rush into trusting someone like Victoria. Every time she got closer, I reminded myself to keep some distance, to watch carefully, to make sure Lily wouldn't get hurt if this all fell apart. But despite my caution, something real and dangerous was slowly growing between us. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and undeniable, like the first warm breeze after a long winter. I didn't know where it would lead, but I could feel it pulling us both in deeper with every passing day. In the quiet evenings that followed, Victoria began opening up about her difficult relationship with her late father. She would sit on the old metal chair in the corner of the garage while I worked, her voice low and thoughtful as she spoke about growing up in a house full of money but very little warmth. She told me how her father had been a hard man, always pushing, always expecting perfection, never quite knowing how to show love in a way she could feel. The words came slowly, like she was pulling them out from places she had kept locked away for years. She admitted how much her wealth had isolated her from real human connection. "People see the money first," she said one evening, staring at the floor. "They see what I can give them, what I can do for them. After a while, you stop trusting anyone. You build walls so high you forget what it feels like to be seen as a person." Her voice was quiet, almost sad. I could hear the loneliness in it, the kind that money can never fill. It was the first time I saw the real cost she had paid for the life she lived. I shared my own struggles and fears about raising Lily alone. I told her about the nights I sat beside my daughter's bed, wondering if I was doing enough, if I was failing her by not being able to give her the security other fathers could. I spoke about the fear that lived in my chest every time her breathing became difficult, The constant weight of knowing one bad month could take everything away. Victoria listened without interrupting, her eyes soft in the dim light of the garage. For the first time, we spoke to each other as equals, not as the rich CEO and the poor mechanic, but simply as two people who had both known loss in different ways. She started spending real time with Lily, building a genuine bond. At first it was small things, sitting with her while she drew, asking her questions about school, bringing her a new set of crayons. But slowly it became more. I would watch from a distance as Victoria helped Lily with her breathing exercises, or read her stories when she was tired after treatment. The sight of my daughter smiling at her did something to me I couldn't quite explain. I could see the old arrogant Victoria slowly disappearing, the sharp edges, the cold distance, the need to always be in control. They were fading day by day. In their place was a woman who was learning how to be soft, how to care without expecting anything in return. It was beautiful to watch, but it also scared me. But I still didn't fully trust what was happening. Part of me kept waiting for the old Victoria to return, for this gentle version of her to disappear the moment things became difficult. I remained careful, always protecting Lily's heart first, even as I felt my own walls beginning to weaken. Something real was growing between us, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for where it might lead. One quiet evening, as the sun was setting behind the trees and painting the garage in soft golden light, Victoria told me she had fallen in love with me. She said it simply, without her usual armor, her voice low and honest. She wanted a real relationship, not a joke, not a contract, not something temporary. She wanted to be part of my life, and Lily's life, if I would let her. The words hung in the warm air between us, heavy with meaning. I was torn between my feelings and my need to protect Lily. Part of me had already started caring for her more than I wanted to admit. I had seen the way she looked at my daughter, the patience in her voice, the genuine effort she was making. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt before, was terrified. I had spent years building a safe world for Lily, and I couldn't bear the thought of bringing someone into our lives who might leave when things became difficult. I sat with that conflict for many nights, turning it over and over in my mind as I lay awake listening to Lily's steady breathing. After deep thought and long conversations with Grace, I decided to take a chance. Grace had listened patiently as I poured out my fears, then told me gently that love always carried risk, but shutting it out completely carried its own kind of pain. Her words stayed with me. One evening, I told Victoria I was willing to try, but only if we moved slowly and carefully, especially for Lily's sake. She agreed without hesitation, her eyes soft with understanding. We started seeing each other slowly and carefully. At first it was small things: coffee after the shop closed, quiet walks in the park, evenings where she would join us for dinner. There was no rush, no pressure. We talked about everything and nothing, learning each other in small, honest pieces. I kept my guard up, always watching, always ready to pull back if I saw any sign of the old Victoria returning. But she never did. Lily began to warm up to Victoria in a beautiful way. At first she was shy, staying close to me, but slowly she started showing her drawings to Victoria, asking her questions about her work, even letting her help with small things around the house. Watching my daughter smile at her, hearing Lily laugh when Victoria tried and failed to draw a car, did something to my heart I can't fully describe. It felt like the missing piece we had been living without for so long. For the first time in years, our small family started feeling complete. The house felt warmer. The evenings felt less lonely. There were moments when the three of us would sit together, Lily between us, and I would feel a peace I hadn't known since my wife passed. It was fragile, but it was real. Still, old wounds don't heal overnight. I carried the scars of loss and betrayal, and sometimes they would ache when I least expected it. I remained careful, always watching, always protecting my daughter's heart first. But even with that caution, I could feel myself hoping that this time things might be different, hoping that the woman sitting beside me on those quiet evenings was here to stay. Lily's recovery after surgery was going well, giving us all a new kind of hope that felt almost fragile in its brightness. The days in the hospital slowly turned into weeks at home, and I watched my daughter grow stronger with each passing sunrise. The color returned to her cheeks, her breathing became steadier, and she started moving around the house with that familiar energy I had missed for so long. The smell of medicine slowly faded from our small home, replaced by the simple sense of fresh coffee in the morning and the faint oil from my clothes when I came back from the shop. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe a little easier too. Victoria and I had many honest conversations about our past pain during those quiet evenings. We would sit on the old wooden bench outside the garage after Lily had gone to sleep, the warm Texas night air thick with the smell of creosote and distant rain. She spoke about the loneliness that had lived inside her for years, how success had become a wall that kept everyone at a distance. I listened as she described the pressure of always having to be the strongest person in the room, the fear of ever appearing weak. In return, I shared my own struggles, the emptiness after losing my wife, the constant fear that I wasn't enough for Lily, the nights I sat alone wondering if I was failing my daughter by not being able to give her more. She admitted how empty her life had been before meeting us. Her voice would grow soft as she described coming home to a beautiful but silent penthouse, surrounded by expensive things that never filled the space inside her chest. She told me she had spent years chasing the next deal, the next achievement, thinking it would finally make her feel whole, only to realize it had left her more isolated than ever. Listening to her, I could see the real person beneath all that armor she had worn for so long. I finally allowed myself to trust her completely. It didn't happen in one big moment. It happened slowly, in the small things. The way she remembered how Lily liked her sandwiches, the way she would sit with me in silence when the worry became too heavy, the way she looked at my daughter with genuine care. One night, as we sat together watching Lily sleep peacefully, I felt the last of my walls come down. For the first time since losing my wife, I let myself believe that maybe love could come again, even in the most unexpected way. We started building something real and beautiful together. It was slow and careful, filled with quiet dinners, Sunday mornings at the park, and late-night talks that stretched into the early hours. The house felt warmer. The laughter came easier. Lily began to thrive under the love of two parents. Her drawings now often included all three of us standing together. Watching my daughter bloom under Victoria's attention filled my heart in ways I can't fully describe. The future started looking brighter than I had ever imagined. There were still hard days, of course. Old fears would rise up sometimes, reminding me how quickly things could change. But even with those moments, I could see a path forward. A life where Lily could grow up feeling safe and loved, where I didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. It was a future I had stopped believing in for a long time. Yet even as everything felt like it was falling into place, a small part of me remained watchful. Healing takes time, and some wounds run deeper than others. I wondered sometimes what would happen when life tested us again, when the real world came knocking with its usual difficulties. For now, though, I chose to hold on to the hope that had quietly grown between the three of us in that small garage with the leaking roof. Years later, when I look back on everything that happened, the memory that always comes first is the day Victoria and I got married in a small, beautiful ceremony right behind my old shop. The Texas sun was warm but gentle that afternoon, filtering through the leaves of the old oak tree that had stood there for decades. We didn't want anything grand or expensive, just a few close friends, some flowers Lily had helped pick, and the familiar smell of grease and metal that had been part of my life for so long. It felt right to have the ceremony there, in the place where it all began. Lily walked with us, healthy and smiling brightly, her small hand holding mine on one side and Victoria's on the other. Her cheeks had color again, her breathing was steady, and the light in her eyes was something I had prayed to see for so many years. She wore a simple white dress and carried a small bouquet, looking up at us with so much joy that it made my chest feel full in a way words can never fully capture. In that moment, watching my daughter walk between us, I felt the weight of all those hard nights finally lifting. Victoria used her resources to help other single parents and children with medical needs. She didn't do it for show or praise. She poured her energy into building a foundation that supported families like ours, families who were fighting the same battles we had fought. I watched her change from a woman who once measured everything by power and profit to someone who found real purpose in lifting others up. The work she did was quiet, but meaningful, touching hundreds of lives in ways she would never boast about. I kept my small garage open, never forgetting where I came from. Even after everything changed, I still rolled up that bay door every morning, still worked with my hands, still came home with grease under my fingernails. Some people thought it was strange that I didn't sell the shop or retire, but for me it was important. That leaky roof, those old tools, the smell of oil and coffee in the mornings. They reminded me of who I was and what really mattered. Victoria understood that. She never asked me to change that part of myself. Years later, Lily would tell people how her father fixed more than just cars. She would say it with a soft smile, explaining how I had fixed our family when it felt broken, how I had taught her that real strength isn't loud or flashy, but quiet and steady. Hearing her speak those words always filled my eyes with tears. She had grown into a kind, strong young woman, and I was grateful every single day that I had been given the chance to raise her. Victoria often said the best thing she ever did was make that silly joke. She would laugh about it sometimes when we sat together in the evenings, remembering how a cruel, offhand comment in a dusty garage had somehow led us to this life. She told me more than once that the day she walked into my shop thinking she was better than everyone else was the day she was actually saved. I never disagreed with her. In the end, what started as a cruel joke became the beginning of our real family. The three of us built something lasting together, not perfect, but real and full of love. There were still hard days, of course. Old fears would surface from time to time, and life would test us in new ways. But we faced them together. And as I sit here now, looking at the shop that still stands after all these years, I often think about how one small moment, one painful humiliation, led us to a life richer than any of us could have planned. The future still holds its uncertainties, but for the first time in many years, I face it with hope in my heart, and my daughter's laughter in my ears.